The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers, their light bouncing off the polished floors like tiny stars. The air smelled of roses, an expensive perfume. A perfume I could never afford, but that seemed to cling effortlessly to my sister, Emily. She glided through the crowd in a gown that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale, her laughter ringing like wind chimes. And me, I was the shadow in the corner, the afterthought everyone tried to ignore. I had spent months preparing for this day, not because I wanted to, but because it was expected. My parents had made it clear that my presence was mandatory. They had whispered reminders in their stern, clipped tones. Make sure you're polite, don't embarrass us. We wouldn't want anyone to notice you. I tried to laugh it off, tried to pretend that I didn't feel the sting of their words, but inside, my chest ached. As I watched Emily sway gracefully through her first dance, my mother appeared beside me like a storm cloud, her diamond earrings catching the light. She gave me a look that could freeze fire. Do try not to ruin everything, she hissed under her breath, loud enough for me to hear. My father, ever the statue of cold perfection, didn't even glance at me. His silence spoke volumes, louder than words could ever manage. The moment came when my parents were to give their speech. I perched on the edge of my seat, a fragile spectator of their scripted perfection. My mother's voice, sweet and saccharine, turned venomous as she leaned slightly into the microphone. "We are so proud of Emily," she said, eyes glinting with pride, "and of course, we hope everyone knows how important it is to surround yourself with family who uphold certain standards." I swallowed hard, sensing the storm before it hit, unlike some members of this family. She continued, letting the words hang in the air like daggers, "who have repeatedly shown themselves to be a disgrace, but we still love them, in our own way." The ballroom seemed to shrink, all eyes on me. I felt the heat rise to my face as a few murmurs rippled through the crowd. My stomach dropped. Disgrace, that word. My parents had always criticized me behind closed doors, but never before in front of everyone. Not at my sister's wedding. I tried to smile, tried to play it off, but the knot in my chest tightened. Emily's eyes met mine for a brief second, pity and embarrassment swimming in their depths. I wanted to sink through the floor, wanted the earth to swallow me whole. I could feel my hands trembling, my voice caught somewhere in my throat. I left the ballroom under the pretense of checking on something. But really, I just needed to escape. Outside, the night air hit me like a wave, cold and shocking. The sounds of laughter and clinking glasses faded behind the closed doors. I hugged my arms around myself, trying to hold in the tidal wave of humiliation, the years of quiet mockery finally spilling over. For years, I had been the shadow in the family photographs, the one who never got praised, the one who never measured up. Birthdays, holidays, every small victory, always met with comparisons, always the reminder that I was less. And tonight, that truth had been amplified, broadcasted to everyone I had ever known. I sank to the steps outside the hotel, my phone trembling in my hand. I didn't cry, not yet, but I could feel the tightness behind my eyes, the sting threatening to break through. And as I sat there, under the indifferent stars, a quiet resolve began to form. If they saw me as a disgrace, then I would become something they could not ignore, something they would regret ever underestimating. The night swallowed me in its darkness, but even in that silence, a small ember of determination glowed. One day, they would remember this night, and they would wish they had never spoken that word aloud. The days after the wedding were a blur of shame and silence. I moved through our family home like a ghost, avoiding the stares of relatives who had been witnesses to my parents' cruel words. Every photograph, every congratulatory card that had been left for Emily felt like a reminder of my insignificance. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. Even breathing felt heavy, weighed down by the judgment I had been forced to wear like a badge of dishonor. I retreated to my room, shutting the door on the world. My old journals, dusty and forgotten, suddenly became my refuge. I read them obsessively, flipping through the pages of dreams I had once dared to hope for. My handwriting was small, neat, filled with ambitions and moments I had treasured in secret. The first story I had written, the painting I had completed, the music I had recorded, All of it had been dismissed, belittled, forgotten, except now I clung to it like lifelines. The sting of betrayal didn't fade, it fermented. I remembered how my parents had always compared me to Emily, measuring every small achievement against her perfection. "Why can't you be more like her?" my mother had often said, a phrase that had carved itself into my memory, sharper than any knife. My father, more subtle, had preferred to ignore me entirely when I faltered, letting silence do the cutting. I replayed the wedding speech over and over in my mind. The word disgrace echoed in the empty corridors of my thoughts, bouncing off the walls, refusing to let me rest. Shame turned to anger, anger to bitter resolve. I realized that I had spent too long shrinking myself, apologizing for existing, trying to please people who would never see me as anything but a failure. It was during one of those long, sleepless nights that my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a single message from an unknown number. "You are worth more than you know. Don't waste another second, I can help." I stared at it, heart hammering. My first instinct was to dismiss it as a prank, a cruel joke sent by someone who had overheard the wedding. But something in the phrasing felt deliberate, almost intimate. The timing was uncanny. I had been spiraling, trapped in the shadows of my own life, and now this message felt like a key, a doorway I hadn't realized was there. Days passed and the message haunted me. Who had sent it? How could they know? Finally, curiosity outweighed my skepticism. I replied, "Who is this? How can you help?" The answer came almost instantly. "Meet me, tonight, 8 p.m., be ready to start." I didn't sleep that night. Questions raced through my mind, but under them all was a spark I hadn't felt in years. Hope, the ember of determination that had flickered on the steps outside the wedding, now glowed brighter. Perhaps this was the chance I had been waiting for. The opportunity to reclaim myself, to stop being the person my parents had labeled a disgrace. By the time the clock struck 8, I was trembling not with fear, but with anticipation. I had no idea who I would meet, what path would unfold, or if this was even real. But I had nothing left to lose. For too long, I had allowed my parents' cruelty to dictate my self-worth. Now I was ready to listen, to learn, to fight not for them, not for Emily, but for me. That night, as I stepped out into the cool evening air, a strange sense of clarity washed over me. I wasn't just hurt, I was awake. I wasn't just powerless, I was ready. Somewhere in the shadows someone, or something, had reached out, promising a new path. And I would take it, no matter where it led. The first step toward revenge, toward vindication, was never easy. But for the first time since the wedding, I felt alive. And I knew, deep in my bones, that nothing would ever be the same. The weeks that followed the mysterious message became a crucible in which I began to forge myself anew. I never saw the sender in person at first. Our communication was through coded texts and encrypted emails. But the guidance was precise, almost surgical. I was taught to see what my parents had always dismissed: my intellect, my creativity, my ability to influence and control situations. Every small skill I had once ignored became a weapon in my arsenal, every quiet observation a map for the life I had been denied. I started with the simplest things: my appearance, my presence, the way I carried myself. I no longer slouched in the corners of rooms or spoke in timid whispers. My wardrobe transformed, not into something flashy, but into clothing that radiated confidence and subtle authority. My voice, once barely above a murmur, grew steady, commanding attention without arrogance. People began to notice me, not for the mistakes I had made, or the ways I had fallen short, but for the sharp intelligence and calm assurance I now exuded. But transformation was only half of the plan. I had a long memory, and it was fueled by every cutting remark my parents had ever made. I catalogued each slight, each betrayal, each insult, storing them in the quiet recesses of my mind, not to stew in bitterness, but to understand the patterns, the weaknesses. My father's pride, my mother's obsession with appearances, Emily's fragile vanity, everything became a chessboard. I enrolled in a series of courses to sharpen my business acumen, leveraging scholarships and online programs that cost nothing but time and focus. I networked quietly, building relationships with influential people who would never guess that I had once been the family's disgrace. I started freelancing, taking on projects that allowed me to earn money and learn power in subtle ways. By the time anyone noticed, I was already a force quietly reshaping my life. The text messages continued to arrive, each one pushing me further, refining my strategy. They weren't just lessons in skill, they were lessons in patience, in observation, in strategy. I learned to move quietly, to influence behind the scenes, to plant seeds that would grow without anyone realizing I had sown them. Then came the first taste of revenge, not cruel, not overt, but sharp and satisfying. My parents had long boasted of their social circle, their impeccable taste, their ability to judge character. In an instant, I began to infiltrate those circles, attending events where they were present, slowly earning recognition and respect. Invitations came, compliments were given, and slowly, whispers began to circulate about me. She's so talented. I never expected this from her. How did she become so accomplished? My parents' faces, when they heard these murmurs, were masks of forced composure, hiding the shock I relished. Every step of my progress was meticulously calculated. I did not gloat, I did not confront. The sweet satisfaction lay in their silent awareness that the child they had scorned, the one they had labeled unworthy, was now a reflection of success they could not control. I was no longer a shadow. I was a presence, unmistakable and undeniable, and through it all, I continued to grow not just in skill or wealth, but in self-respect. I no longer sought validation from my family. I had become my own standard. The anger that had once burned as a wound now fueled me as a quiet, steady flame. Every achievement, every recognition, every moment of being taken seriously was a reclamation of the years I had spent being invisible. The plan was far from complete. There were still subtle moves to make, lessons to learn, and vulnerabilities to exploit. But for the first time, I realized something critical. Revenge was not merely about punishing them. It was about proving to myself unequivocally that I was more than their judgment, that I had been more than the label they had forced upon me. And so, armed with knowledge, skill, and a patience honed sharper than any blade, I continued to prepare. The night of reckoning was not yet here, but it was coming. Every day, every step, brought me closer to the moment when my parents would finally see what they had lost. Not just the child they had scorned, but the power of someone who refused to be diminished. It was a crisp autumn evening when I finally stepped into the room where my parents and Emily were gathered, their laughter filling the space. I could feel their eyes sweep over me not with warmth, not with recognition, but with the faintest flicker of curiosity. For years I had been invisible to them, a shadow they could dismiss without guilt. Tonight, I was impossible to ignore. I entered with calm confidence, my posture straight, my expression serene. My wardrobe spoke volumes, understated elegance that radiated power. Every detail meticulously chosen to convey control and success without arrogance. The murmurs began almost immediately, is that I hadn't realized. I let them wonder, letting the anticipation build. There was no need to announce my achievements soon. The proof would speak for itself. Emily smiled nervously, her flawless composure faltering for the first time since childhood. "You look different," she said, a tremor in her voice betraying her unease. I smiled softly, the smile that had been years in the making. "I've grown," I replied simply. The words were unassuming but loaded with everything they had refused to see: resilience, determination, brilliance. It started subtly. An acquaintance from one of my professional circles mentioned my latest project, a venture that had already garnered praise and attention in our city's elite. Conversations shifted in my direction. Eyes lingered longer, voices softened in respect. My parents' polite smiles became tight, their attempts to appear unaffected slipping as they realized the magnitude of the person standing before them. My mother's eyes widened imperceptibly when she overheard someone mention my latest recognition in a prestigious journal. My father's jaw tightened as whispers of my expanding influence reached him. Emily, the golden child, paled slightly as she realized the brilliance her parents had ignored for so long was no longer hidden. But the true moment of vindication came later, when a formal dinner was arranged under the guise of a family gathering. I arrived with a guest, someone influential in my field, who had no idea of my family dynamics. During the introductions, my companion casually praised my achievements, highlighting awards, contracts, and accolades I had earned quietly over the past months. Every word landed like a gentle hammer on the fragile pride my parents had always clung to. I watched them squirm with subtle horror, trying to maintain composure while the room's attention shifted unmistakably toward me. No shouting, no confrontation, no accusations, just the undeniable reality that the disgrace of the family had become a force they could neither dismiss nor control. Their carefully maintained facade of superiority crumbled under the weight of my quiet success. Emily tried to laugh it off, making a small joke about how I had finally caught up. But it was hollow. I let her words pass, refusing to engage in mockery. I wasn't here to gloat. I was here to show that I had grown beyond their judgment. The satisfaction lay not in their embarrassment, but in the knowledge that I had reclaimed my dignity and self-worth. Later, when I spoke privately with them, my voice was calm, unwavering. You called me a disgrace at Emily's wedding. I let that hurt me for years, but look at me now. I didn't need your approval to succeed. I needed only myself. The silence that followed was profound. My parents' faces were pale, their eyes avoiding mine. For once, they couldn't use words to wound me. I had outgrown their cruelty. The sweet revenge wasn't humiliation. It was my triumph, the undeniable proof that they had underestimated me, and that I was far more than their narrow definitions of worth. As I left the room that night, Emily's eyes lingered on me with a mixture of awe and regret, my parents' silence a testament to the power of self-belief. I realized something vital. Revenge is sweetest not when it destroys others, but when it elevates you. I had turned their cruelty into fuel, their doubt into motivation, and their disregard into opportunity. For the first time in my life, I felt complete not because they recognized me, but because I had recognized myself. And in that recognition, I found the ultimate victory. The family disgrace was gone. In her place stood someone no one could diminish, not even the people who had once called me worthless. The night air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves as I walked away. The glow of the city lights mirrored the fire within me. I had been invisible. I had been underestimated. I had been called a disgrace, but now I was unstoppable. And I would never let anyone, not even my own family, define me again.